Okay, A&P1 students, in this video we are going to finish talking about the skeletal muscle anatomy. And we want to do that this week so that we can understand the physiology that we'll talk about next week. Okay, so recall that our skeletal muscle cells are innervated, which means that they have numerous nerves bringing nerve impulses to them to stimulate them to contract. So this is showing a nerve, and nerves will be coming off of the spinal cord or off of the brain. So this one, they're coming off of one's coming off of the spinal cord. So this is our nerve, and that nerve is actually, if we magnify it, we'll notice that it's made up of a bundle of neurons. And neurons, remember, are our functional cells of the nervous system. They're the cells that send nerve impulses. So if we go back to our neuron here, recall that that neuron sends a nerve impulse from the dendrites along the cell body down the axon to the axon terminals or synaptic bulb. So that's what's running through this nerve is neurons. And in this nerve, they've simplified it. There'd be a lot more neurons running through there, but they're just showing two of them running through that particular nerve. And so we talked about this in the earlier video when we talked about innervation of the skeletal muscle cells. The neurons, we have a special name for them if they're taking a nerve impulse to a muscle, which is going to cause movement. So we call them motor neurons. So these are, there's one motor neuron in here that I think is red in color, can't tell, and then the other one is blue in color. It's kind of hard to tell which is which. But, and that's just, they have different colors, that way we can see which skeletal muscle cells or fibers. So there's 4 and then 2 here. So we have like a little group of skeletal muscle fibers or cells here. So that's just kind of help you tell which motor neuron is taking a signal to which skeletal muscle fiber or cell. So I think it's this motor neuron 1 is blue, so it's taking the signal to 2 of these skeletal muscle cells. And again, we're simplifying this. There'd be a lot more it would take a signal to, but we're showing it taking a signal to a nerve impulse to these particular skeletal muscle cells or fibers. And then the red one is taking a nerve impulse to these 4 skeletal muscle cells or fibers. And if you notice, this is the, kind of see this one the best. This is the location, we'll enlarge this a little bit. This is the location where this particular motor neuron, the axon terminal or synaptic cleft of this particular motor neuron, is going to communicate with the sarcolemma, which remembers the plasma membrane of this skeletal muscle cell. So that's our synapse. That's the area or location where the neuron is going to communicate with another cell, in this case, skeletal muscle cell. So a little bit more of our anatomy for that. Okay, so our objective, let's see if I can just flip to this. Yep. So our objective is to define what a motor unit is, and then describe its distribution in a muscle and why it varies in size. So we're going to talk about that. I'll have to move that one down. Okay, so when we say motor unit, what we're talking about is this single motor neuron. So we'll say the red one. So that single motor neuron, and then the skeletal muscle fibers it controls, which in this case the red motor neuron controls 4 of these skeletal muscle cells or fibers. So as a whole, we call that a motor unit. And then we have one motor unit here involving I think it's motor neuron 2, which is red. And then we have a second motor unit, which is the blue or motor neuron 1, that's sending nerve impulses to these 2 skeletal muscle fibers or cells. So we have 2 motor units there. Okay, so with these motor units, some things we need to be familiar with. So they will vary as far as their size. And so when we say size, we just mean how many skeletal muscle fibers that they provide a nerve impulse to, or how many they innervate. So they could innervate just a few, like this one. So we have a motor unit that's red, that's innervating 4 skeletal muscle cells or fibers. But we could have a motor unit where we have a motor neuron that is going to send a nerve impulse or innervate like thousands of these, different skeletal muscle fibers or cells. So they vary in the size. And the reason they do that is because of control. There's some muscles in the body that we need to have a more or a higher degree of control. So the book uses an example of our muscles that control our eyes. So we have to have a much greater amount of control of those muscles because we need to have very precise eye movements so that we can read and see things in our environment, because that's a big way that we sense our environment and survive if we can see things. So we want more control of those. So we'll have on our eye muscles smaller motor units. So we'll have a motor neuron that maybe just innervates 4 different skeletal muscle fibers or cells. But if you think about the muscles in your thigh that are mainly there for movement, like walking, there doesn't have to be as much precise control in that particular area of the body. So then we'll have a motor unit that's much larger, that's going to go and innervate, 100 or 1,000 different skeletal muscle fibers in a particular muscle at that point. So we have less control, but we don't need it as, we don't need as much precise control in those areas as we do in other areas of the body. So our motor units will vary on size. And again, the size difference is just how many skeletal muscle fibers or cells that they innervate. So if they innervate a lot, they're considered a big motor unit or a large one. If they don't innervate that many, they're considered a small motor unit. All right. So another thing to be aware of is that the skeletal muscle fibers or cells that a particular motor neuron is going to innervate or send a nerve impulse to, they're not all in one area of a muscle. So if we think about our eye muscles, you may have a motor neuron that's innervating skeletal muscle fibers in different areas of that muscle. So they're not all clustered together. They're spread apart. So kind of like this, where you got a skeletal muscle fiber cell here that's innervated by a different motor neuron than this one. So we want we don't want it all in one bunch. So we kind of like the wide distribution of different skeletal muscle cells to be able to provide the proper contraction in those particular muscles. So realize that they're kind of dispersed, which motor or skeletal muscle fibers that they innervate are kind of dispersed throughout that muscle that they are innervating. So, okay. So another thing I always talk about when we talk about motor units, and I don't think they really talk about it here much, but this kind of explains why we have the ability to kind of control how much force we apply to some sort of movement we want to do. So say if I want to pick up maybe a piece of paper off the table, when I go to pick that piece of paper off the table, I'm going to have to apply a certain amount of force to flex my arm to pull that paper maybe up towards my face so I can read it. So my brain knows that it's paper and that it's not that heavy, and so my brain or my spinal cord, a nerve impulse will be sent down a motor neuron to my muscles, say my biceps brachii area muscle, and then just so many motor units will be, they call it recruited, for me to pick up that piece of paper. So if I'm picking up something light like a piece of paper, I may only have 1 or 2 motor units that are going to send nerve impulses to skeletal muscle cells in my biceps brachii. And then that'll be just enough force for me to pick up that paper and bring it, towards my face so I can read it. And that would be an opposite, or a contrast to that, I guess, would be if, say, there's a, trying to think of something heavy. Oh, our textbook is very heavy. So say our textbook or any big book is laying on the table, and I want to pick that up with my hand. So my brain can understand that that's going to be heavy, and I'm going to have a lot more force in order to pick that heavier object off the table. So in that case, there's going to be more motor neurons that are sending nerve impulses to more skeletal muscle fibers, so more recruitment of motor units, so that more of my skeletal muscle cells in my biceps brachii are going to contract so that I have enough force to overcome that weight of that textbook and then be able to pick it up off the table. So these motor units are important for control, and the recruitment of them are important for applying the right force to certain situations. So, all right, so that was our objective over the motor units, which was number 7 here. So defining a motor unit, describing its distribution and why it varies in size. And then the next thing that we've kind of already talked about, but we'll talk about it a little bit more, is the neuromuscular junction. I guess we actually haven't used that term yet, but so we're going to talk about the neuromuscular junction and understand the anatomy at the neuromuscular junction. So let me go back to our picture, and I think there's a picture a little bit lower that shows, yeah. Okay, so is there another picture? Oh yeah, let me start with this picture and then okay, so we've already talked about the synapse. So this is showing a synapse here between a motor neuron. So this is the axon terminal. They kind of got it cut open so you could see inside of it, but we're not going to go into those details till next week. But this is the bulb, synaptic bulb, or you can call it the axon terminal. So that's the motor neuron's axon terminal or synaptic bulb, and it's communicating with the sarcolemma, which is this here, of this particular skeletal muscle fiber or cell. So this is the synapse. So because this synapse is happening between a motor neuron and the sarcolemma of a skeletal muscle fiber, they call it a neuro and then muscular junction. So this is a neuromuscular junction. So it is a synapse, but they have like a specific name for it because it's between a nerve, motor neuron, and a muscle cell. They call it a neuromuscular junction. So that's the term that we're going to refer to it as. So it's kind of like the special name for this particular synapse in the body. And you can also see it here as well. They kind of enlarged it. So yeah, that's too large, but over here. So you can see that, and you can please be aware that there's like this little space. They're not actually physically touching each other. They're just like really close to each other, and there's this like little space called the synaptic cleft that's present in there. So they're not physically touching each other. All right, so that is our anatomy, last bit of anatomy that we need to know before we start talking about how our skeletal muscles contract, so the events in that. So that was the last objective we covered, was number 8 here, the 2 components of the neuromuscular junction. All right, so we will talk next week about, starting with objective 9, about the functioning physiology of our skeletal muscle cells. So I'll see you next week.